if you're a creator and you've been hit by a bunch of copyright takedowns, first, take a couple deep breaths. This is not the end of the world. I'm sitting here as someone who had 30 plus copyright strikes come in at once a couple months ago, and it was a protracted legal battle, and it did tear me apart, and I'm back, and everything's fine. And all my videos are back up. So you can handle this, and you can manage it, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I do so. So while it feels oppressive and tyrannical that a company can frivolously say, you're infringing our copyright, your video is gone, and your channel's gone, and your livelihood is gone, there are legally established, well-defined protections for you, and all they require from you is to take a deep breath, take a sip of tea if you like it, and write out a copyright counter notification and send it. When you make a counter notification, a full and valid counter notification on that content, 10 business days later, your content goes back up, unless the initial claimant takes you to court, period. Alrighty, welcome everyone. I'm Teeaboo, and I'm here to talk about copyright. I'm doing this extemporaneously. I don't have a script. I haven't written anything out. I kind of just rolled out of bed and woke up to this. There seems to be a sea of chaos as a number of reactors are getting struck on either Patreon or YouTube or their various other platforms with DMCA takedown requests. You get a couple of those in rapid succession, and your account on any of those platforms, if they have a process for handling them, is going to get banned real quick, and you're going to feel on the outs. So I've had this happen a few times, and I've dealt with it more than a few times. I've probably served upwards of 50 copyright counter notifications and DMCA takedown requests on easily upwards of 80 plus videos. I've been making reaction-style content for a good long time, and I've defended myself repeatedly against copyright claimants. Before we get into what to do about a copyright takedown request, I want to make something distinctly, especially extremely clear, and that is this. It may be trivially obvious to you that your content is valid and fair and good and useful and fair use as defined by law, and it may not be. So it's really, really important that each of us as creators, reactors, and users of the copyrighted material labors of other individuals and companies, that we take this system a little bit more seriously than I think we take it, and really attempt to validate ourselves. Is your content truly fair use? Does it meaningfully transform the pieces of copyrighted material that you are using? Do you use as little of the copyrighted material as is possible to get your point across, or instill within the audience some feeling of whatever your content instills in them? Those are questions that you're going to have to answer for yourself. They're questions that I continuously have to answer for myself and continuously grapple with as I produce content. Did I do enough in this video to make it worthwhile? Is it enough, for example, to sit there and look at the screen and make expressions? Does that transform meaningfully the experience of viewing the content? And to what extent can you legally and morally and ethically reproduce the content within the piece of material that you're distributing if it's got such levels of transformation to it? It's really not clear. And part of the lack of clarity is that, well, nobody's really taken anybody to court about a reaction video yet. And we've been sort of skating by on this theory that as long as you respond to a copyright counter notification, most companies won't take you to court because it doesn't matter that much to them, actually. That's going to change at some point. At some point, one of these companies is going to say, great, you want to fight this? We'll fight this. Let's go fight it out in a federal court. And that's the way that it will go, because that's what the laws define. And then we'll have a basis. We'll have a legal basis for determining something more, maybe, depending on how that court case goes, depending on who gets taken to court, depending on who takes them to court, depending on what the quality and nature of the content that gets taken to court actually is. We'll get something, and insofar as like a determination of the broad gray scale, gray area that is reaction style content. But at present, it's kind of a grayscale, gray area, Wild West sort of thing that's really only defined by the systems that are in place as placed by the safe harbor content service provider hosts that determine the way that the copyright is actually played out via the exchange of DMCA takedown requests and then counter notifications and that whole process. YouTube, for example, is probably the biggest processor in the world of DMCA takedown requests, I would imagine. Google in general as well, given that they're the forward-facing content provider and host for an immense amount of material, and an immense amount of copyrighted material has illegally been uploaded and thus subsequently taken down off of YouTube. And it's kind of amazing to step back and look at the system of YouTube and go, well, it's still working. That's weird. And, if I search a movie on YouTube, it's pretty unlikely that I'll be able to find a non-copyrighted non-copyrighted version of it that's got like a little filter over it. Usually those have been filtered out. And I think while we may argue in a somewhat trivial sense, like, no, freedom for everyone to post whatever they want, I think actually all of us would like to live in a society where if you put hundreds of thousands, billions, whatever, hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever you put into producing a piece of art, you would have some control over where that thing gets posted and hope that it doesn't just get shared to everyone willy-nilly. Maybe. Depending on you. I mean, I'm a weirdo who posts all my shit for free because I'm a weirdo. That doesn't mean that everybody works that way, and it's pretty obvious to argue that a whole lot of the artistic industries of our wonderfully artistically valid nation and international sphere in general would not function were there not a rapidly available and easily accessible financial sort of exchange that I think is fundamentally predicated on copyright and on the ownership of the thing that you have produced. That being said, the landscape of copyright counter notifications is a tricky one to navigate at first, but it makes a lot of sense once you get into it. My first thing that I want to say is directed to those reaction channels and individuals who make content that utilizes the copyrighted content of others, the copyrighted material of others, for the purposes of their own expression, discussion, however you want to frame what you're doing. It's unclear to me what you're doing, and I've been trying to investigate the question of what are we doing when we react to content anyway? Like, what is this? Because it's weird, and it does something to the brains of the people watching, and it does something to the brain of the person creating it, and it's far more than just redistributing the copyrighted material, but what it is exactly is hard to nail down, and something that, to some extent, differs between each of us. The experience of coming in and watching one of my videos versus the experience of coming in and watching a Semblance of Sanity video versus the experience of coming in and watching a blind video are totally different experiences, even if each of those videos is related to the same central piece of copyrighted work, Me watching an episode of one particular anime is different from watching Ravenclaw watch one episode of anime, is different from watching Film Buff watch one episode of anime, and each of those is distinct and different and interesting, and what they actually accomplish in it is different. But if you're a creator and you've been hit by a bunch of copyright takedowns, first, take a couple deep breaths. I highly recommend a big deep breath through the nose, followed by another short inhale through the nose, and then let it go. Balance out your carbon dioxide and oxygen a little bit and get a little bit of calm going. It's important. I also personally ascribe a lot of value to a cup of green tea. Once you've done whatever self-care you need to level your head a little bit, realize that this is not the end of the world. I'm sitting here as someone who had 30-plus copyright strikes come in at once a couple months ago, and it was a protracted legal battle, and it did tear me apart, and I'm back, and everything's fine. And all my videos are back up. So you can handle this, and you can manage it, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I do so. The first thing to know is a little bit about the DMCA itself, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This is an act that was passed by Congress, and it defines out the process by which somebody can claim that you've posted their copyrighted content and get it taken down. And it also defines out the process by which you can respond to that claim in a legally defined manner and get that content reinstated. And it defines the step after that, which is if they don't want you to do that, then they have to take you to federal court. In the jurisdiction as presented by the safe harbor distributor host of the content. So in the case of many of us, that would be YouTube or Patreon. I can't find it. If I had a currently active copyright counter notification in process, I'd be able to go and find it pretty easily because it's listed when you fill out the form. It lists out specifically which district court you allow yourself to. You're like, yeah, totally. I'll abide by the decisions of this district court if we get taken to court. As far as I know, no specifically Japanese company has taken a person to court in the United States for the use of copyrighted material. It's like not a trivial thing to do, especially across national borders and the ocean and all the weirdness of that. It's totally possible that it could happen. And given what I see as a shift in policy and attitude of certain companies, namely Aniplex, toward reaction-style content, it's entirely possible that they are getting their ducks in a row for illegal proceedings and are just waiting for the right opportunity. And we'll see. But we'll see, and it's kind of an open question, so you got to be prepared to go to court. Regardless, that's the next step of the thing, and all of that is presented out by the DMCA itself. Section 512 of the DMCA, limitations on liability relating to online material, or material online. The first portion of this sets out what are called safe harbors. YouTube, for example, is a safe harbor. Patreon, for example, is a safe harbor. What these say is that nobody can sue YouTube for hosting copyrighted content so long as they abide by the following laws and processes in order to become an arbitrator of what is fair use and how these things shake out. If they were not serving counter notifications and copyright takedowns, then YouTube would become liable for the content that they host, and that would be bad for YouTube, so they don't do that. They follow the law. And the same is true for any hosting provider, Patreon, Vimeo, whatever it is. They're going to follow these established legal forms because they don't want to be liable for the content that's hosted on their platform. So the DMCA sets out exactly what you have to do in order to claim that a piece of content posted on one of these safe harbors is infringing, which is to say, they stole my shit. Take it down, please. And the safe harbor has to abide by that, and will do so immediately because they don't want the legal repercussions of failing to abide by their contract as a safe harbor. That's called a takedown notice, sort of. It's also, we'll refer to it as like a strike on YouTube because YouTube has its own system for engaging with these, but at core, it is a DMCA takedown notice. And it must be full and valid. So it must be a written communication provided to the designated agent of a service provider that includes substantially a physical or electronic signature, identification of the copyrighted work. So like, it's my book and he put it on the YouTube. Fucker. Or a list. Yeah, sure. Identify the material that is claimed to be infringing. It's this video right here. Contact information from the complaining party, address, telephone number, whatever. And a statement that the complaining party has a good faith belief that the use of material in the manner complained of is not authorized by the copyright owner, its agent, or the law. So we didn't give you permission to do this. And finally, a statement that the information in the notification is accurate and under penalty of perjury that the complaining party is authorized to act. Okay, cool. If you fail to provide any of this stuff, that copyright takedown request can be just fully ignored because you failed to follow the proceedings of it. I actually had this happen a few weeks ago. A company, a third-party copyright holder company, which are hired by copyright owners in order to pursue action against people who have used their copyrighted content, sent in a bunch of copyright copyright takedown requests against a bunch of my videos that I had already argued the takedowns on, and they sent them in incomplete, and YouTube was like, and first immediately served the takedowns and was like, oh, sorry, we're taking down your videos, they're gone, and also your channel is banned because you got like 3 at a time. Okay, so I started responding to them, and I got an email from YouTube support a couple days later that went, oh, actually, they didn't materially and fully fill out the whole thing as that they were supposed to. We're just going to reinstate your videos, and we'll see what happens. And so far, they haven't tried again, so that's interesting. But it's important to know that even if the takedown request that is being served is not entirely valid, it is by far in the safe harbor company's best interests to treat it as though it were valid, because if they don't, it gets legally hairy. So that's part of why YouTube is so hair trigger on jumping on these things, and like they'll serve those copyright takedown requests immediately with a strike on the channel, and your video is gone, period. because that's the first step, and that's what they're supposed to do as a safe harbor. It's not YouTube being evil or authoritarian or tyrannical. It's they're following the law, and they're scared to not follow the law, and they should be. You have a bunch of tools at your disposal to argue against that, and you're expected to know what those are, and YouTube doesn't do a great job of telling you what those are, and Patreon does an even worse job, and so we'll talk about that in a second. Because the step that is in your court, once a copyright takedown request has been served and your content has been taken down, and now your whole life is falling apart and you're banned on all the platforms and you can't post anything and you don't know what to do, now the ball's in your court, and you got to get ready to act, and that's why you got to take the deep breath and be ready. So there's a portion under Section G. It essentially sets out that the service provider must take reasonable steps to promptly notify the subscriber that has removed or disabled access to the material. So my YouTube video got taken down. I need to get an email and a notification and something else from YouTube that says like, hey, we took down your video. That way I can actually engage in the legal response to the thing. If I didn't, then that would be fucked up, right? They could just the timer starts ticking on my channel getting destroyed and I don't have any chance to handle that or respond to it, and that would be bad. Additionally, upon receipt of a counter notification described in the next paragraph, promptly provides the person who provided the notification with a copy of the counter notification and informs that person that it will replace the removed material or cease disabling access to it in 10 business days, and actually replaces the removed material and ceases disabling access to it not less than 10 nor more than 14 business days following the receipt of the counter notice, unless its designated agent first receives notice from the person who submitted the counter notification under subsection C1C that such person has filed an action seeking a court order to restrain the subscriber from engaging in infringing activity relating to the material on the service provider system or network. What the fuck does that mean? Okay. So you got a copyright takedown. When you make a counter notification, a full and valid counter notification on that content, 10 business days later, your content goes back up. Unless the initial claimant takes you to court. Period. That's the flat out, that's the way that the DMCA sets it up. So, if you receive a copyright strike, you should file a counter notification, assuming you're willing to be taken to court, and you should be really careful about that. Take it genuinely and seriously. Again, because no company has, no anime producer has yet taken a reaction channel to court, and that might change, and it might be you. So consider that before you file a counter notification. And when you do so on YouTube, it'll run you through a form that'll say like, I'm really sure that I'm behind this 100%, and you should really be sure that you're behind this 100%. But if you respond with a copyright counter notification, 10 days starts ticking up to 14 days and your content comes back unless they respond with a court action, a legal action against you in order to subpoena you, essentially, and take you to the court directly. That's unlikely, but possible, so be ready for it. It might be necessary. That's the basic. That's the core of the thing, and that's, maybe I should cut that and edit it and put it front and center, which is, if you have received a copyright strike or copyright takedown request that has been considered valid by a safe harbor institution like Patreon or YouTube or Vimeo or whatever, under the auspices of the DMCA, you have a legally defined process for getting your content back and preventing any bans, strikes, repeat infringer policy, all of those things. And that is quite simply to respond with a complete and valid copyright counter notification. How do you do that? And if you do so, that means 10 days later, your content comes back, 10 to 14 days, your content comes back, unless you are taken to court, which is unlikely. So you should file a counter notification, but you should be aware of the taking to court part because it might actually happen. Okay. How do you file a counter notification? Usually you just send it to the email of the copyright@blank.org. Do not send copyright counter notifications directly to YouTube's copyright service email. It doesn't work as well. Do them through the form fill out thing. When you get a copyright strike on YouTube, there'll be a thing and you can click on it and it'll say like, submit a counter notification, and you want that one, and you do the form and fill it out with the form, and it deals with a lot of the problems of the thing. Okay. Contents of that counter notification. It must be a written communication provided to the service providers, blah, 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 that includes substantially the following: a physical or electronic signature of the subscriber, your name, legal name, not your channel's name, identification of the material that has been removed. This is my video that got removed. It was here at this link and I want it back. A statement under penalty of perjury that the subscriber has good faith belief that the material was removed or disabled as a result of mistake or misidentification of the material to be removed or disabled. No matter what, you say that, because under the auspices of mistake comes the thing that you're actually going to argue, which is fair use. And I really think that's the only argument that you have for the redistribution of copyrighted content. If your content has no copyrighted material included within it, for example, if you post only a timer-based reaction that contains no subtitles, no box, no nothing, no portion of the copyrighted material whatsoever, except a timer, for example, you're not reproducing a portion of the material at all, then the mistake or misidentification is your whole argument. It's like, I don't reproduce their content, they're lying, this is false, and you're done. If you do reproduce any of their content, you'd better have a fair use claim. And we'll talk about exactly what that means as we move along. But a statement that you have a good faith belief that the material was removed or disabled as a result of mistake or misidentification, you say that you do. The subscriber's name, address, and telephone number, yep. And a statement that the subscriber consents to the jurisdiction of the federal district court for the judicial district in which the address is located, which is your address, or it can also be to the jurisdiction as presented by the safe harbor, which in YouTube's case it is. In the sample counter notification provided, you may optionally specify your reason for the belief of that the material was removed or disabled as a result of mistake or misidentification. This is the important part, I think, and you should be prepared to argue this specifically. However, you don't necessarily have to, as it says, it's optional. As long as you provide this valid copyright counter notification, which is just you saying, no, put my content back up, they'll put your content back up as long as they don't have the legal justification to take you to court and the belief that doing so will be financially in their best interests, you might say. So there's little harm to you in posting in sending a counter notification. It will result in the restoration of your content. However, again, they could take you to court, and that could ruin you, and so you should be careful. When we talk about specifying the reason or belief, there are a few reasons that are valid. Misidentification includes cases of exceptions to copyright, such as fair use or fair dealing. Fair use itself is a United States legal doctrine and not one that's necessarily upheld in other countries. For example, Japan does not have fair use in the same way. However, if you're posting to a United States-based content host, they're going to abide by the laws of Federal Section 512 and the laws regarding fair use and fair dealing, which I can find here in 92 Section 107. What is fair use for the reproduction of a copyrighted work? Well, it's a pretty short section, so we're just going to read it fairly straightforwardly, straight through. Limitations on exclusive rights, fair use. Notwithstanding the provisions of Sections 106 and 106A, the fair use of a copyrighted work, including such use by reproduction in copies or phonorecords or by any other means specified by that section for purposes such as criticism, comment, news, reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright. In determining whether the use made of a work in any particular case is a fair use, the factors to be considered shall include 1. The purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of a commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. 2. The nature of the copyrighted work. What is the piece of work that you're using? Is it itself an educational text? And if so, if you're using it for educational purposes, is that more or less fair of a use of it? Or is it, for example, an artistic and commercial artistic work like a movie where it's not for educational purposes and your use of it might be detracting from its purpose as a commercial work? 3, the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. So if you use 5 seconds of a movie in order to make a huge point about the film and filmmaking in general and what it means when a director does this and that, that's a pretty different circumstance than if you reproduce an entire movie and then talk about it for 5 seconds and go, that was a cool movie, and then cut the video. One of those might be fair use and one of them might not, and it's, well, sort of obvious from a pattern recognition sense to say, well, that one's more fair than that one, but it's not exactly clear, and it's why we set these things out for a judge to decide. The amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. does not define anything specific. So there's no, I've seen many times people are like, well, I only included 10 minutes of a 20-minute episode of anime, and so it's fair use. Doesn't count. Doesn't do it. There's no bright line there. There's no hard boundary for like what amount of the use, what substantiality of the work did you use in order to produce the thing. And then there are a series of legal decisions that form a basis for determining like the heart of the work being used. Did you spoil the novel? Did you what did you take and use again, and how much of it and why? It's sort of a gray, tricky, fucky question. And number 4, the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. The fact that a work is unpublished shall not itself bar a finding of fair use if such a finding is made upon consideration of all of the above factors. That sets out the narrowly defined legal space for fair use. But it's, again, more complicated than that because there's this basis in some court cases. One of the court cases to note is Lenz versus United States Universal Music Group, which was a pretty interesting case where they argued essentially that the music group that was filing their filing for copyright damages took into account at no point whether the use might have been fair use, and so didn't have a good faith belief that their claim was valid. So it's important that the company who's claiming copyright infringement has a good faith belief that what you're doing is not fair use, which they probably don't. So you can argue that deeper down the line in court, but for your purposes, it probably isn't going to matter. What is definitely going to matter is bullet point 1, purpose and character of the use, including whether the use is of a commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. Courts are more likely to find that nonprofit uses and non-commercial uses are fair. However, this does not mean that all nonprofit or non-commercial uses are fair, and all commercial uses are not fair. Instead, we balance that against, or the courts will balance that against other factors. Additionally, and this is part of the court background that's been decided as a basis in proceedings and not a part of any written law, unfortunately, transformative uses are more likely to be considered fair. Transformative uses are those that add something new with a further purpose or different character and do not substitute for the original use of the work. To some extent, reaction videos are inherently transformative. You watching somebody watch a thing is different from you watching the thing solo. But it's not that different. And it really depends how much they say about the thing and how much additional information they provide. And then you balance that against how much of the work itself is reproduced. And you get into a very tricky gray area. What I do and have always done and will recommend at this point that you do is to argue that your work is transformative so long as you believe that it is. And you should really believe that it is before you make this argument trivially, because otherwise you hurt all of us. And you should be making transformative work to the best of your ability, trying to add as much as you can to the content. Partly because it will fulfill you and make you feel better as a creator to make something that you think is of value and to put effort into it. And it will serve your audience better because you will have put more value into the thing. And it will serve your finances better because you'll get more audience members because you put more effort and value into the thing. I really, truly believe that. But regardless, your argument should be that you have transformed meaningfully the piece of content from one sort of experience to another sort of experience. You could argue this as trivially as, or as smallly as saying that by watching the thing with somebody else, you're changing the nature of a single watching experience to one of a shared watching experience, and that's not nothing. And I agree. You're going to have a hell of a time arguing that in front of a judge, though. So it would behoove you to say stuff during the video and hopefully say stuff with some meaning. And that meaning might be as small as your reaction to the thing, your emotions and expressions and speech about the way that the thing is going. And it might be as large as extrapolating from every section of the video that inspires you or of the thing that inspires you, lasting long diatribe or meditation on the fundamental underlying structures inherent in the mytho-poetic nature of the piece of art and blah, 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 and essentially trying to teach a film class That's the route that I try to take usually. But it behooves you to, first off, try to make sure that your work is transformative and then to argue that it is such. On bullet point 2, most likely you're on the hardest side of this one to argue, because most likely you are reproducing or creating based off of creative or imaginative works, which are what the copyright law is built to protect. And so, by reproducing those works, you're directly against the letter and the thrust of the law itself. So, simply be honest about what the kind of work is and why it matters that you're talking about it. Amount and substantiality. This is going to depend distinctly and specifically on how you make your videos or content or whatever. A lot of people make timer-based things. A lot of people make full picture-in-picture things. A lot of people make edited things. I can't say which of those is the most valid. It's the timers. But regardless of which tactic you take in terms of the way you edit and create your videos, you should endeavor to include as little of the copyrighted work as possible in order to make the thing work, make the video that you've created work. And if you want to argue that that requires the reproduction of the entire piece of the entire episode of anime or the entire manga, you can do that, and there is a legal basis for doing so, and I have done that and will continue to do so in the past. But it's a tricky area, and you're much, much safer if you make content that is, for example, just a timer. Much safer, legally speaking. Finally, the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work, and this is a tough one because it's all theoretical. It's really impossible to say whether reaction content, for example, causes material financial harm by removing viewership of existing pieces of copyrighted material. It's quite possible that it does. It's quite obvious that it does in some circumstances, and it's quite obvious that there are some reactors who are more than a creator themselves, a redistributor of content with their own visual placed upon it. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you can't just search for X show on YouTube and find it for free, but you can search for this dude who sits there and says nothing throughout the entire show, who has simply reproduced the content in a smaller window, and watch that for free. And then you don't have to pay for Crunchyroll or Vimeo or Verve or High Dive or Hulu or HBO Go or Disney Plus or whatever it is that the content would be sourced on. You don't have to pay for that because you just found a free streaming provider, baby. It's all money, baby. And then that becomes doubly worse if that person is profiting commercially off of their reproduction of the copyrighted work. Yikes. That's probably not the one. However, there is an argument to be made in the reaction space specifically that most of the people watching reactions of certain forms are rewatching the content, watching it for a second time or third time or 10th time. Sometimes people are so entranced by a piece of media that they are desperate to hear and see and experience it multiple times, but also desperate to see what other people think about it. And that, I think, is a fundamental human thing. We look at what other people are looking at. It's the way we determine what has value more broadly than our own perceptions. It's the way that we remain sane, is to try to determine if other people have the same responses to experiences or events that we do. And it's the way that we grow in many senses, is to observe the responses and thoughts and experiences of others and to differentiate them from our own and go and say, well, they had a totally different response to this situation than I did. And it's not about whether one of us is right or wrong, but how interesting it is that one of us sees this scene as, for example, a terrible travesty and deeply unsettling, and another sees it as a funny joke. That's really interesting. And we seek those things out continuously. It's part of human nature, and it's part of the process of experiencing, is to experience along with and to share one's experiences and to get back the sharing of experiences from others, and thus to build out something like a socially agreed upon set of representations and experiences of what the thing actually is. Because a movie doesn't exist except in the experience of watching the movie. And even that experience of watching the movie doesn't exist except for the experiencer. So the only way to get a really good depiction of what a film is to experience it from multiple perspectives, to see it from as many angles as possible. And the only way to do that is to communicate honestly and effectively about the experience of the thing itself. The only way to do that is to share your experience. And one of the ways that we've discovered to do that is that you just record the experience. You put a camera on yourself and you watch the movie, and then you share that, and other people really eat it up. And it's no joke that they do. And it's not trivial that we do. And it's really interesting to me and to many others that we do. It's curious. It's weird. But it might poke at something really, really important about the human social experience. In any case, lots of people rewatch content. And in that case, you can question, well, is there actually an effect upon the potential value of the copyrighted work caused by that? And might it not have a positive effect? Especially, for example, in the case of a timer-based reaction. Consider that your favorite reactor watches a show that you've never watched that's on a streaming service that you don't currently subscribe to, and they only present it in a timer-based form, and you'd really like to watch their reaction to the show because it seems interesting. Well, you might go and purchase a subscription to the thing and watch the entire series on the thing so that you have the context and the ability to sync it up and whatnot in order to see the thing. I get comments like this all the time. Unfortunately, we're in anecdotal space, so this doesn't prove anything. But anecdotally, I get people saying, first off, I'm here to rewatch this thing with your experiences, and I'm just here to see what somebody else thinks of it. It happens all the time. And second, I watched the first episode with you, and I thought it was pretty interesting, so I went and I paid for a subscription to the thing and watched all of the show, and now I'm back to see what you think of it. It's a case of somebody who wouldn't have been introduced to the piece of content specifically going and searching it out. Interesting, but anecdotal and specific, so not really an argument here. You can argue the portion on the effective use on the potential market for the value of the copyrighted work how you want to. I would suggest arguing it in some way to some extent, because it matters, and because it's something to think about. On a more personal, moral, ethical level, I think it's important to ask yourself, am I harming artists? Am I doing the bad? 'Cause you might be. 'Cause you might be. 'Cause I might be. 'Cause it's not trivial to answer the question of whether you are. If you're reproducing someone's art without their permission in a way that could reduce viewership via paid means of that artist's work, that might not be the best way to go about things. Maybe. And while you can figure out justifications for almost anything, you might not want to justify that one. You might want to change it. Regardless, you should write something in that section on misidentification about why your work is fair use. That being done, you should send in your copyright counter notification in response to each of the filed and processed DMCA takedown requests that you receive. If you send in a full and complete counter notification, you will receive a response from the safe harbor that you are interacting with, Patreon, YouTube, Vimeo, whatever it is. If they have their copyright shit in order, which they may not, frankly, let's be clear. You will receive a response from them saying that they will reinstate your content within 10 days. And it's important to note that on the YouTube side, the strikes become put on hold. Your channel will still not be able, you will not be able to upload to your channel if you have 3 strikes or more, but they will be put on hold. And your channel deletion will be put on hold so long as you have an outstanding copyright counter notification in process. Thus, it is important to get a counter notification in process as soon as possible. Make sure that it's an effectively written one and doesn't just get thrown under the bus, but make sure that you put one in place. Patreon similarly has a statement at the end of their copyright policy, which says, please note that if we receive multiple DMCA notices for your page, that we may ban you from using Patreon as part of our repeat infringer policy. Any notices you send a counter notice for will not be counted against you in our repeat infringer policy. So that is, if you respond with a counter notification, that doesn't count against the repeat infringer policy, and so your channel won't be banned. That's pretty important to know. So, what are the takeaways? First, it's not the end of the world, but it might be the end of the specific way that you're doing things. And it's important to evaluate the way that you're doing things and ensure that to the best of your ability, you are not infringing the copyrights of others, you are not stealing the works of artists, you are not harming artists, and you are producing something of material value that transforms the nature of the works that you utilize as part of your process of creation. It is not the end of the world, though, because there is a legally defined and well-established process for you to counter-notify on each of those takedown requests and get them resolved, and they probably will be. It is important that you take some degree of care in that process when you respond to those DMCA takedown requests in order to ensure that you do so in a way that if the company on the other side of the fence were to escalate to a legal battle, you would be confident in what you had said, to defend yourself. I think it's very important. But there is a way for you to save your channel and remove the bans or reinstate the works that you have uploaded. And it is important, I think, that if you do have a genuine belief that your content is valid, that you fight for it. We have these copyright laws for a reason. They sometimes feel like they're oppressive. Usually that is a feeling that is born out of a lack of understanding of the law itself, because the law itself is quite extraordinarily freeing, actually. It is exceptional as a United States citizen that I live in a country where I can, on my word, say, nah, my shit is valid, and the site which I have uploaded to must take that seriously, regardless of whether they agree with me. YouTube has no arbitrational ability except to validate the text of the form itself, and that it follows the format. YouTube doesn't get to decide whether my thing is copyright infringement or not. Nobody does. The only thing that does is whether I'm willing to stand up for my content. And the only person who can say otherwise is the copyright owner claimant themselves. And to do so, they have to take me to court. So while it feels oppressive and tyrannical that a company can frivolously say, you're infringing our copyright, your video is gone, and your channel's gone, and your livelihood is gone, there are legally established, well-defined protections for you, and all they require from you is to take a deep breath, take a sip of tea if you like it, and write out a copyright counter notification and send it to the relevant person, or people, or company, or whatever. So I recommend that you do that, because this gray area is going to become more clearly defined over the next years, and the way you act in response to the threats being presented to you by these large copyright holders will determine the future of speech, fair use, and artistic merit as we move forward into the future. For everyone, forever. So treat the situation with some care, and then stand up for what you believe in. And I think all will work out pretty well for you and for me and for everyone else. Thanks for listening. I'm going to end this extemporaneous blah now. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, you can support me on Patreon. $1 goes a long way, gets you a bunch of little things that you can get, and that's pretty cool. I'm going to go decide whether I re-edit my Kimetsu no Yaiba Mugen Train reaction to contain less copyrighted content in the discussion portion, or whether I simply engage in actively choosing to get a copyright strike for that video in order to appeal it and fight out this legally defined dispute in order to get that video established and solid on my channel for forever. I'm not sure which I'll do at the moment, but I'm grateful that I live and work in a system where I have the opportunity to stand for my own work. And I'm also grateful that I live and work in a system that attempts in many ways to protect the rights of creative individuals to the products of their labors. Because I would not want to live in a different system. Thanks for watching. I'll see you for whatever you see me in next. And peace.